So continuing on with part 3 of the head and the neck, let's talk about the muscles of the throat. So again, some of these are going to be repeats, some of them aren't. The mylohyoid is not. So hyoid, your hyoid bone, the one that's the floating bone in the neck, this actually elevates the floor of the mouth and the tongue. It depresses the mandible, okay? When the hyoid, this bone right here, is flexed, okay? So, okay? The stylohyoid, if you think of the styloid process and the hyoid bone, this actually elevates that hyoid bone, okay? Now, again, bones, tendons, I'm not really worried about. So the hyoid bone, that's going to be a bone. Thyroid cartilage, that's cartilage. It's not a muscle. Let's see. The thyroid gland, the clavicle, the sternum, these are not part of this, okay? So don't worry about trying to figure out what they're doing. So the digastric. The digastric, yes, it's got two bellies, but they do the same job, okay? So you've got depressing and retracting the mandible, okay? And again, it elevates that hyoid bone. This is throat, so it pulls that up. Yeah, the sternothyroid, right there, okay? The sternothyroid, I'm gonna have to look it up. I'm sorry, guys. Brain fart. Okay. Sorry. Here and then here, same muscle. Okay, it's just one side and the other because one's kind of embedded and the other one's exposed. Okay, so the sternohyoid, it depresses the hyoid and fixes it when opening your mouth. Okay, the cricothyroid, this one right here, see how it's actually on the thyroid? This actually helps to lengthen your vocal cords. So when I think about producing sounds with my voice, I think of a guitar string. The looser the guitar string, the lower the pitch that it makes. The tighter you make it, the higher the pitch that it makes. If you're not familiar with guitar strings, take a rubber band, okay? Leave it kind of loose and pick and see what you hear versus making it stretch quite a bit and hear what sound it makes, and it's a higher sound. So that's what we have here in this picture. Again, for the most part, almost everything here is either going to be something that is not a muscle, like the hyoid bone or the larynx, or something that we just talked about in the last slide. The one that is a bit different is the thyrohyoid, okay? So remember that we had the sternohyoid, and then here's the thyrohyoid, okay? These are actually two different muscles. From here to here is one muscle. From here to here is a second muscle. So this depresses the hyoid bone. It elevates the thyroid cartilage in the neck of the larynx. The larynx is your voice box. Remember, la, 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 voice box. And it fixes, again, that hyoid. It steadies that hyoid when you're opening your mouth, okay? Another view, but everything in this we've already gone through, so I'm not going to go through it again, but you've got the stylohyoid, the digastric, sternocleidomastoid, the hyoid bone, again, you don't need that, the trapezius, clavicle is a bone, the omohyoid, again, you've got the superior and inferior bellies, the digastric and the mylohyoid. But as far as going through the functions again, we just went through them. Now let's talk about the internal muscles, the ones that actually help us to do things like swallow, okay? Styloid process is a bone. You know that from the last practical. The Styloglossus, okay? This actually narrows the fauces, which basically is the back of your mouth where it meets your throat, that hole that exists there. It narrows that and it elevates your tongue, brings it up, okay? To the posterior of your mouth. I don't know if you can see that. That. Like when somebody says, you know, pick up your tongue. I know that's weird. Sorry. Okay. We talked about the Sternothyroid already. The Styloglossus. Okay, Styloglossus is going to retract your tongue. It's going to pull it back into your mouth. Okay, the Hyoglossus, it's going to retract your tongue, but it's also going to depress the sides of your tongue. Pull those down, okay, toward the sides. The tongue itself actually does have a whole, I think it's 8 intrinsic muscles. Intrinsic means they're internal. So the intrinsic muscles of your tongue actually just change the shape of your tongue. Instead of bringing it in this case, it's just going to change. It's mainly for the process of speech and being able to create the sounds that we create, or when we're eating and we need the tongue to push the food toward our teeth and then help us when we're swallowing. Frenulum is just that piece of tissue right there, so don't worry about that. The Genioglossus, okay? The Genioglossus, again, depresses your tongue, but it also protrudes your tongue. It makes it stick out. The Geniohyoid, however, so Genioglossus, okay, depresses and protrudes. The Geniohyoid is going to protract the hyoid and depress the mandible, okay? So pull this back, the hyoid bone. You can pull that back and then bring your jaw down, okay? Now, this is looking into your mouth as if somebody, okay? So, the tensor veli palatini, right there. Okay. It tenses your soft palate, the back pink part of your mouth. And when you do that, you open the auditory tube. The tube that's draining your middle ear actually opens. We notice that most of the time when we're swallowing. If you swallow, you hear that click. That click is because that tube is opening. Now, the Levator, Bellini, Palatini, this is going to be elevating your soft palate, but when you're swallowing. If you swallow, you'll feel that kind of pop up in the back, which is actually really important. Okay, Salpingio Pharyngeus. Salpingio Pharyngeus. Okay, I know some of these is like, whoa, when you see it, that's how you say that one. It elevates the pharynx, which is the back of your throat, not your voice box. Larynx is the voice box. Pharynx is the back of your mouth, your nose, and the upper part of your throat. Again, it opens those auditory tubes when you're swallowing. So again, this is part of that. When you swallow, you hear that popping. Now, the uvulae here, see that right there? That dangly thing in the back of your throat? This gets elevated, it gets pushed back when we're swallowing, and what it's supposed to be doing is it's supposed to basically prevent things from going up your nose. Let's see. Yeah. And like I said, the tongue has like 8 intrinsic muscles that change its shape. The tensor Palatini. We just talked about the levator, Bellini, Palatini, again, we just talked about. Now, the superior pharyngeal constrictor, the middle pharyngeal constrictor, and the inferior pharyngeal constrictor. Remember, I said the pharynx is the back of that throat, right? The back of your nose, back of your mouth, the top of your throat, right above your larynx. All of these do exactly what it says, constrictor. Okay, so they basically narrow the pharynx, specifically when we're swallowing. So all of these do the same thing. The only difference between them is where it's narrowing. Superior is higher, middle is middle, inferior is lower. Okay. The Styloglossus, the Styloglossus, that elevates the pharynx. So if you put your hands here and you swallow, take a drink of water, whatever, you'll feel it kind of pop up a little. It actually is intentional. It's part of our digestive system function to kind of seal off where things aren't supposed to go. But that popping up, part of that ability to do that is that Stylopharyngeus. Okay. And then pretty much everything else we've either talked about, or it's things like the hyoid bone and the thyroid cartilage, which we don't need to worry about. Okay, just so that we're clear, you do need to know all of these figures and the muscles in all of these figures. I'm just not going through them because we've been through them once before. But like, for example, the buccinator, that was way in part 1. We talked about it and it's still here. The Styloglossus, we just talked about that in the previous slide. Don't worry about the stylohyoid ligament. I'm not worried about the ligaments. The Genioglossus, again, we just talked about that, 2 slides ago, I think. The mylohyoid was part 2, I believe. Was it part 2? No. It was the first slide that we just did in part 3. Don't need to know the hyoid bone. Don't need to know the thyroid cartilage or the cricoid cartilage. Now, the cricothyroid, did we talk about that already? I didn't think we had. No, we did not. Okay. Give me a sec. So the cricothyroid lengthens the vocal cords, making our voice go higher. So it pulls the guitar string more tightly. And that is part 3 of our head and neck muscles.